siblings, Alyssa here. Thanks for coming back to listen to another story time. We're going to continue working on the Animal Ark Pet series. So we left off with book number 2, so we're going to start book number 3, and this one is called Rabbit Race. So without further ado, let's begin. Chapter 1, New Arrivals. Let's take Blackie to Lilac Cottage, Mandy Hope said to her best friend, James Hunter, as they came out of school on Friday afternoon. Blackie was James's black Labrador puppy. Mandy and James had house-trained him. Now they were trying obedience training, but that wasn't so easy. Good idea, said James. I want to see if we can teach him to fetch. He's still a little afraid of Benji, so it's difficult to train him at home. Benji was the hunter's cat. He was still a little jealous of Blackie. Poor Benji, Mandy said as they walked down Main Street in Welford. I think he feels left out. James nodded. I know, he said, but it won't be for long, now that your Grandma and Grandpa are letting us use your backyard. It's very nice of them. Grandma and Grandpa love Blackie, Mandy said firmly. They're happy to have him there. It's no problem. Mandy never thought any animal was a problem. She loved them all. Both her parents were vets, so she'd been brought up surrounded by all sorts of animals. James looked up at her and shoved his glasses further up his nose. He was a year younger than Mandy, but he was her best friend, probably because he liked animals nearly as much as she did. Bye, Mandy. Bye, James, Sarah Drummond called as she got into her mother's car outside the school gates. Have a good weekend. Tell Licorice we were asking about him, Mandy called back. Sarah and James had gotten puppies at the same time. Her puppy, Licorice, was one of Blackie's brothers. Mandy and James waved as Sarah's mom drove off. Blackie and Benji will be fine together once they get used to each other, Mandy said to James. And once Blackie is more obedient, said James. We'll get Grandma to have a word with him, said Mandy. She seems to be able to do anything with Blackie. James grinned. Look, he said, pointing across the road. Peter Foster, one of Mandy's classmates, was just opening his front gate. He staggered back as a hairy bundle of brown and gray fur hurled itself at him. It was Timmy, Peter's terrier. I wonder if your grandma could do anything with Timmy, James said. Mandy giggled. I doubt it, she said. Timmy is something else. They reached the general store. From here, Mandy and James went different ways. Mandy lived in an old stone cottage called Animal Ark at one end of the village, and James lived in a modern house at the other end. The cottage was not just Mandy's home. Her parents' clinic was attached to it, which was where the name came from. Mandy always looked forward to going home after school to see how the animals were doing and to check on any new arrivals. See you later, James said to Mandy. Just then there was a rumbling sound, and an enormous van came down Main Street and pulled up outside the store. The driver leaned out and pushed his cap back on his head. Can you tell me if we're anywhere near Hobart's Corner? He asked Mandy and James. They looked up at him in surprise. There was another man in the truck with him. On the side of the van, in big red letters, were the words, Rapid Removals. Oh, said Mandy. Is somebody moving into Hobart's? The man smiled. Somebody is moving in, if I can find the place. Oh, sorry, Mandy said. If you go down to the end of the road and turn left, you can't miss it. It's a big old house. The gate is right on the corner. It's falling apart, said James. It's been empty for ages. The driver looked at the other man. Just as long as we can get the furniture in, that's all we care about, he said. Thanks a lot for your help. Before Mandy could ask him any more questions, he drove off. A bell rang as the door of the store opened behind them. Now, what was that all about? Asked Mrs. McFarlane. Mr. and Mrs. McFarlane ran the general store. Mandy thought the store was the best shop in the village. It sold comics and candy and all kinds of things. Mandy and James had even gotten Blackie's first collar and leash there. Somebody's moving into Hobart's Corner, said Mandy. Mrs. McFarlane looked surprised. Really? She said. after all this time, and I never heard a word about it. I wonder who bought that old place." She disappeared back into the shop to tell Mr. McFarlane. James and Mandy looked at each other. "Mrs. McFarlane hears about everything that goes on in the village," said Mandy. "How did she miss this news?" James shrugged. "Beats me," he said. "Why don't we go and see?" "Hobart's Corner is on the way to the Lilac Cottage. I can meet you there." Mandy ran all the way home and rushed through the door of Animal Ark. "You'll never guess," she said. "Guess what?" said Jean Knox, the receptionist, looking up from a pile of forms. Mandy leaned against the receptionist's desk and tried to get her breath back. "A moving truck stopped outside the general store to ask directions to Hobart's Corner," she said, her eyes shining. "Someone is going to live there at last." Jean raised her eyebrows in surprise, and her glasses slid down her nose and off the end. They swung on the chain around her neck as Jean shook her head. "Well now," she said, "and I thought that old house would never be sold." "I want to tell Mom and Dad," said Mandy, jumping up. "Are they very busy?" "Your dad's got a patient with him," Jean replied, "and your mom has gone to a calving up at Belden Farm. But she said she'll be back in time to make dinner." "Oh, good," said Mandy. "Dad tries his best, but he just isn't as good of a cook as Mom." "And just what's wrong with my cooking?" said a voice from the door of the clinic. Mandy whirled around. Dr. Adam Hope was standing there, smiling his lopsided smile. "Oops," said Mandy. Dr. Adam laughed. "Caught you there, Mandy," he said. Mandy noticed her dad was holding something small and furry. "It's Ginny," she said. "Is she better?" Ginny had been a very sick little guinea pig when she first came to Animal Ark. Her teeth were very overgrown, and she couldn't eat properly. "I've trimmed her teeth, and she's eating like a horse now," said Dr. Adam. "Oh, Ginny," Mandy said, stroking the guinea pig's reddish-brown coat. "Pam will be so pleased." The little animal looked up at her with its big dark eyes. Pam Stanton was in Mandy's class at school, and she had been really worried about Ginny. "Oh, Dad, I've got some really exciting news," said Mandy. She told her father all about the moving truck and Hobart's Corner. "Do you think the new people at Hobart's will have pets?" she said. Jean Knox laughed. "Most 9-year-olds would wonder if they had children," she said. "But our Mandy is more interested in their pets," Dr. Adam said. Mandy shook her fair hair out of her eyes. "Of course I want to know if they have any children." Jean perched her glasses on her nose and looked over the top of them at Mandy. "Could that be because the more children there are, the more pets there will be?" she asked. Mandy smiled widely at both of them. "How did you guess?" she grinned.